welcome to the PocketGamer.biz podcast week in mobile games, where we discuss the week's news and provide some insights. I'm Craig Chapple, head of content at PocketGamer.biz. With me today, as always, Aaron Astle, our news editor. How you doing, Aaron? What have you been up to?
Yeah, doing well, thank you. Not had a whole lot of excitement going on outside of work. It's
too hot.
Slightly more. It is too hot. I've enjoyed having you back. It's taken the pressure off a little bit.
Giving you time to write up some great interviews that we'll go into.
Thank you.
And one really interesting one, a big one for next week as well. So.
Yes, it's been good to do those. One of them I've been meaning to get done for a couple of weeks now, really. So yeah, glad to have that out. Teasing for later in the show there. Other than that, really the most exciting thing this week for me has been the Zelda initial kind of casting reveal. So we now know who are playing Link and Zelda. So yeah, it's Benjamin Evan Ainsworth is Link and Bragason as Zelda. I haven't seen. Yeah, I was going to say. So I'm kind of relieved it's not just like, I think the big one was like, oh, Tom Holland as Link seemed a very popular idea. So I'm glad it's they're relatively unknown actors. Then it's not going to be watching it like, oh, it's this person playing Link. It's just going to be, no, this is Link, which I appreciate. They're both English actors as well, so that seems kind of the norm for medieval vibes for films and things.
Yes. Everyone with a thick British accent.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the only thing I've seen of either of them was the Link actor voiced Pinocchio in that remake a few years ago. But anyway, yeah, I'm quite a big Zelda fan, so any little drips of news that they'll give, because it's still like the better part of 2 years till this film comes out, so it's nice to just get something on it.
I can't wait. I've been a big fan of Zelda since a really long time. I don't think I had it on the NES, but I certainly had Link's Awakening on the Game Boy, and then I enjoyed that, but I was terrible at games then. And then I really got into it, obviously, there's a lot of people with Ocarina of Time. There's a lot of people of a certain age, Ocarina of Time.
I played the remake.
There you go, yeah. It's so good. And then Majora's Mask, etc. Majora's Mask is amazing. I could barely remember a lot of it. I remember it being stressful.
Yeah, that's my favourite. I'll have to, so I keep it upstairs, I'll have to bring it for next week's podcast. I've got a replica of the Majora's Mask.
Oh, that's amazing. Cool. I like that. The thing I'm looking forward to is the new Mortal Kombat film, which I had kind of forgot about its existence, but apparently it's coming this year, and they just released a teaser, which was Carl Urban as Johnny Cage in a fake kind of 80s style film, I want to say. Me and a friend of mine personally are going to love this, because we genuinely like those old action films that are kind of insane. Fairly low budget, but obviously classic actors. I know he's gone a bit off the deep end of the last decade, but Steven Seagal's old films, obviously Sylvester Stallone, etc. Those movies, we get a kick out of watching some of those. For anyone that knows me, might have heard me on the podcast before, I'm also a big fan of B movies. So any bad films, I seem to actually like. Right. So anyway, that's enough film talk for this games podcast, which we'll jump to. As always, a few shout-outs. Our upcoming events, not very long now. Pocket Gamer Connect Summit Shanghai, July 30th. That's just before China Joy. PC Helsinki, October 7th and 8th. PC Aqaba, which is in Jordan, 8th and 9th. We do have more events coming up. We've just announced London again, obviously, coming back in January on the 19th and 20th. We know you're going to be there, so you might as well get your tickets now. They're cheaper. But no one does that. We all buy it, we all get our tickets 2 weeks before. And then we got Mobile Games Awards coming up at Gamescom. We'll also have, that's on the Tuesday night. It is the August 19th. And then we have the Pocket Gamer Party on 20th. So we're doing plenty there. And then a quick shout out. I wrote a China games report. I know on the last week's podcast, we talked about kind of the region focus, which was part of this report, but there is more in there, more data. Big feature about what's going on in the region. Few insights from some big executives and experienced executives there, as well as an anonymous source that want to go on the record, but talk some interesting stuff about indies. Profiles, top companies. So there's a lot in there. And I please check it out. I'll put a link in the description, free download report. Right, so we're going to jump into it. And Aaron, we teased your interview. It's a really insightful one. So yeah, please tell us a bit more about it.
Okay, so so I interviewed Rollic's Vice President of Gaming, Utku Erdinch, and we discussed Rollic's sort of evolving strategy from a hyper casual company to a hybrid casual one. And so yeah, the strategy around that, we talked about how Rollic apparently ideates more than 1,000 games a month and tests hundreds of prototypes a month to find the best mechanics and games that can, really thrive on mobile. We also focused a lot on Colour Block Jam, which is one of their releases from 2024, and it's officially become Rollic's highest earning game on an in-app purchase basis. Of course, they have many titles that rely more heavily on ads for revenue, so we don't know whether Colour Block Jam is the highest earning overall, but on a player spending basis, it's the first game in their portfolio to surpass 100 million. And Colour Block Jam also features ads, but we learned that the purchases make up a bigger share of its revenue than the ads do. Yeah, Utku also talked about the difficulty of Colour Block Jam or that he believes it plays a big role in the game's success, and it's one of its appeals. And he said that Rollic communicates with endgame players, and that so far they love the new obstacles and how the difficulty curve shapes in the late game. So they kind of plan to continue going with this. And I believe that helps feed into the monetization because every level is designed to be beatable without any boosters, but you can use them and I guess spend for them if you get tired of doing the same level and it's too difficult. But yeah, they are all technically beatable without doing that. Utku also talked about plans to reward level completion a lot more and sort of went into live ops a little bit and talked about using seasonal events, keeping players engaged with new mechanics, and also trying to increase players' eagerness to complete very hard levels. So yeah, a lot of it revolved around kind of the difficulty of the game, and that is seems to be a big selling point of it. It was also interesting, he talked about Colour Block Jam being played by people who have previously played long-lasting puzzle games. So I guess that is kind of why they like the difficulty. If you're kind of a veteran of puzzle games and been playing them for a long time, having something more challenging, I guess, is an appeal. Yeah, I mean, there were many topics that we went into. He also kind of teased some of the upcoming projects. So, we know that Whole People and Knit Out are both kind of logic-based games that are currently being scaled up. And again, so it seems like most of what they're doing now really is hybrid casual. And yeah, they've moved on from the hyper casual days from when they founded a few years ago. Utku also alluded to developing multiple new concepts, and some of those with original IP and others licensed IP. We don't know what those are, but Rollic's obviously previously worked on Barbie Merge Mystery, and he's hopeful that these kind of unrevealed games will help expand Rollic's audience and reach.
So, just to add a few things, it was a really fantastic interview. I'll try and remember to put a link in. But do check it out on the site. I feel like Colour Block Jam kind of came out of nowhere. I'm sure people are thinking about Barbie as being their next big thing because it's a huge IP, and if you can adapt that well to puzzle potentially, they could do something pretty good there. And to me, it's like, I've already said this before, it's just amazing how these hyper casual publishers, like quite a few of them, have actually managed to will this hybrid casual business model into existence and be really successful at it. Rollic as the example here, but then obviously you've had like a Voodoo that's done really well. So it is really impressive to adapt these company structures that were built for one entirely different business model, really, and shifting their teams, their whole structure, the whole foundations that they're built upon to this new model of slower releases. And one of the things that I thought was interesting that you're saying, perhaps the most interesting part from the interview for me, there was quite a lot, is that it might be an exaggeration, but one kind of testing 1,000 games a month. But what I find interesting about that is that It's like games and or features by the sounds of it. It's constantly coming up with these ideas, testing. And then even it sounds kind of like even like little ideas they'll test and then they work so they can kind of put it into the game, which is fascinating. And I think a lot of other publishers, developers in this market could kind of learn from that if they're not doing it already. And then the other thing I just want to say is it's great news for Zynga. So I think when they were acquired by Take-Two, and for a long time, to be honest, they were kind of living off, and to an extent they still are, but they're kind of living off their old, hugely successful games that have been acquired over the years by Zynga. So like Toy Blast, Toon Blast, etc. And then now, finally, you could argue, is that those teams, so Rollic as the key example here, Peak as well now, they've kind of started making new successes. So Color Block Jam and then Match Factory has been doing well. I don't know if they're necessarily on the level of Peak's top games, but there's a really good sign. Like I think Rollic's having its best months ever, and it's got more stuff in the works. So yeah, check it out. Definitely worth taking a look. And while we're on the subject of Zynga, so there was another interview this week. So the game business, Chris Dring, he spoke to Zynga CEO Frank Gibeau about a number of topics. Really interesting interview. A few things that I wanted to pull out. One of them, and it was what the headline that it led with, which is it was a great headline. So Star Wars Hunters was no failure. So instantly, I'm sure anyone reading that is like, hang on a minute. So a few things. So it's worth noting that I was previously told by multiple people that worked there that it had like around 250 staff working on it at one point. So, and this was over many, I'm not saying it always had that many, but that game was in development for a very, very long time. And it was obviously then expensive to make. It was made at Natural Motion in the UK. I was told also it had a troubled development. I mean, that's probably no news to anyone. And multiple creative leads throughout the project. In October last year, so they're saying it's no failure. So I guess there's some context. Last year, October, Zynga announced layoffs at Natural Motion. Was it announced? Might have been a report. Layoffs at Natural Motion, and it was closing its Birmingham office. According to AppMagic, on the App Store Google Play, Star Wars Hunters made just under $5 million in gross revenue and about 5.5 million downloads. That doesn't include anything that it made from Switch, obviously, because it was also available on Nintendo's platform. Star Wars Hunters is also closing, so it closes down in October. But interestingly, so I kind of take what Frank Gibeau's saying in a way. So he says, firstly, he said the problem was it wasn't a viable business. We weren't able to generate the organic installs from the license. He also hinted at some issues with using the Star Wars IP. He stated that we had some issues on how we could explore the intellectual property. Could you play Darth Vader or could you not? That sort of thing. I'm calling it an open secret. I mean, I think working with Disney, when I've spoken to people about it, it can be quite difficult to do. I believe they're just very protective of their IP, which makes sense, but doesn't help make games. Frank Gibeau said, however, they were valuable in the lessons that they learned, and it's looking at another idea in the same action shooter category, especially since it now has the Unreal tech base and a team in place. He said, we don't really consider them failures at the company. And then he added, it's very difficult to get new products out on mobile in a successful way. You're going to have a lot of misses, and you have to have a strong stomach and culture for learning that oriented to, hey, it missed. Why did it miss? Why don't we try this instead? So I guess the interesting thing in that is like, yeah, you definitely learn from your failures. I guess the only question I would have had is like, well, why is there a reason it wasn't cancelled earlier? It was troubled development. There's a lot of people working on it, really, really expensive by the sound of it to make. Was there any point where it's just like, yes, it's better to just can this? Obviously, then there's questions of like, where do you put those staff? But then maybe you could put them on a project of the lessons you've already learned. But it's probably not that simple, right? So some other interesting things he mentioned were that AAA games not really working on mobile. And in terms of those kind of big single-player console games, and his point was because they just aren't really built for mobile. So I think he said in the interview they have like those discussions with Take-Two about bringing stuff to mobile. But in terms of those projects, it can be challenging. But they have released some premium stuff on mobile, but I think kind of a different way. And then on the App Store changes and direct-to-consumer, he said it was aggressively going after direct-to-consumer. He said, so this is like in the US, the App Store changes, which has now been cracked open by the judge, so you can freely link to your own web stores. He said it's a profound change. The notion that you can have a direct relationship with your players and serve them better and give them more value is huge. It's not just about making more margin. We could perform better CRM. We could build better communities. We can understand more clearly what's happening in the games, because while we get a lot of telemetry, the idea that we could communicate with our players in a much more direct manner is going to create a more valuable relationship. He then added, we're going to be able to serve them faster, more efficiently, and generate more value for them. That will create more profit, which will allow us to invest more money in development and in user acquisition so we can scale games better. I mean, I guess some of that is kind of like that's not new for people that are working in the business, but it is interesting that a publisher as big as Zynga is really going for it. And then the example I always roll out, because they have the public stats, is Playtika, which makes like a quarter of their revenue from direct to consumer. And then the last thing that was interesting that I wanted to point out was towards the end, I remember when I was listening, so he mentioned something that was the difficulty level in kind of casual games. He said they found it was good to actually have a challenging game from the get-go, as opposed to say, like, he was like, exaggerating maybe, but like I can't remember if it was like level 70 or 90 levels in. He said that they found it was just kind of much more impactful to kind of do it from the off. And I think he didn't mean just from monetization perspective of like frustrating players, but from an engagement and retention view. So that was fascinating. Right. What else have you got, Aaron?
Yes, the other one from me this week is about Whiteout Survival. So the game has surpassed 3 billion in gross player spending in under 2.5 years. That's according to AppMagic estimates. So its global launch was back in February 2023, and it's really like the spending has just ramped up over time, over those like 2.5 years. Like comparing its first full month, which was March 2023, the game made just shy of 10 million. And then by like a year later, so March 2024, it had gone from 10 million to over 90 million. And then this March was a record month for it with nearly 206 million. So that was up like 126% year over year. So it's really like just scaled up massively. And yeah, most recently, so in June this year, it made 182.4 million. So a little bit down from the March peak, but still making a lot of money. In fact, that made it the second top grossing mobile game of June this year, behind Tencent's Honor of Kings. And Whiteout Survival's also been in the top 5 for player spending every month this year so far. So it's just become a huge game. Obviously done very well for Century Games. It also released in China last year. This kind of partly explains the ongoing rise, but yeah, it's worth noting that the revenue was already trending like considerably upwards for like a full year prior to that expansion. But saying that, it grew without China, but once it did release there, the market has very quickly become Whiteout Survival's second biggest. Player spending there has already like rocketed past 500 million since May 2024. So yeah, it's the second top spender behind the US and accounts for about 17% of global revenue. Prior to it releasing in China, South Korea was the second biggest market, but that's been pushed down to third now. And yeah, overall, so it's been like 29 months since global launch, and monthly player spending has only fallen 5 times and never for 2 consecutive months. So it's done very well, basically.
So I was just taking a look at it. So like, Whiteout Survival, obviously massive success, and reminds me obviously of the other big 4X strategy game, Lost War, both out of China. And I was just looking at, because I remember more that Last War has been hugely successful. A new Whiteout Survival had, but I thought Last War's way ahead. And then I just look at the revenue on AppMagic. Generally, Last War's been ahead, but they're now both pretty even. I think yeah. Anyway, I guess what I want to say is it's kind of amazing that those two titles have emerged only over the past few years and have become the top games in that category, which is a fiercely competitive and very lucrative one. And so for any companies to just kind of jump in and take a lot of that revenue pie is pretty impressive. Right, we're going to jump onto the last few stories that I've got here. So I was doing the soft launch as usual this week, and there was actually a few quite interesting games that popped up. One of them is Moon Active's. So my headline I put Moon Active takes on Scopely with Monopoly Go like Coin Master board adventure. So if you remember that, some of the key mechanics of Coin Master were basically, we'll say, adapted into Monopoly Go. Clearly was an inspiration after they rebooted development on Monopoly Go. And then now, a few years later, it's like it's gone the other way. So now Coin Master, still enormously successful game, right? But kind of had its lunch eaten a bit by Scopely. They're now soft launch a game that has those more just like those Coin Master mechanics and now sort of copies Monopoly Go. And it has like literally the same Monopoly Go type board, obviously without like the same stops. And it even has like areas where it looks like community chests, chances, and stations, like all in the same place. Like it is that game, and then they'll do like their own little twists, I'm sure. I thought that was really fascinating. I'm curious how that does. It's currently available on Google Play in the Philippines, and it's kind of funny to me how they've copied each other over the years. Coin Master, it's not Monopoly as an IP, so I guess it won't attract like loads of new users, but Moon Active is super successful across other games, and this is the first proper follow-up that they've done with that IP, with the Coin Master IP, because before they did Zoo Master, I think, which didn't do. It did okay, but I think they stopped it. So yeah, interesting to see what happens now. And then another really interesting game that came up. So we're talking about, we just talked about Whiteout Survival. I mentioned Last War. Tencent has soft launched Age of Empires Survival. So Last War's full name is Last War Survival. And it literally takes the same ideas. So it is the gate mechanics, which is the hyper casual part, that kind of draws people in, but with a medieval theme. I say that term loosely because in the creatives, there's like, you've got like an archer fighting waves of enemies, and then there's like a car coming at you. It's not really follow the theme, but it's interesting to me that such a big, I would say, treasured IP in Age of Empires that I know it's mobile, so you do have to adapt things for a mobile audience. But it still kind of shocks me that they've done it in this way. However, they are probably correct. It could, like, with the examples that we've had for major IP, it could be highly successful, but I feel like it could go the other way. And even though it's not the players that will ultimately play it, there could be some kind of backlash of like, what is this? This is like my favorite strategy game ever. You've ruined it. Not that Tencent has to care about that. Yeah, really, really fascinating. And then the last one I wanted to mention, I was looking at games, I just came across that Grunt Rush. So that's the first game by Steer Studios, which is an internal developer at Savvy Games Group based in Saudi Arabia. They kind of built that game with a lot of new developers on board as one of their first big projects, well, first professional project. And they got over like 1 million downloads. I guess that's not like 10 million, 50 million, whatever, right? But it's been taken offline. So we reached out, and then they said it will be back. It's just off for some kind of changes and updates. We'll see if it does come back, but I always find it strange it's rarely ever happened. If a company releases a game, you think it's good enough to be launched globally, and if it doesn't go as planned, you either can it or you work on it while it's live, right? Supercell kind of did that with Squad Busters. And the only example I can think of off the top of my head, it's not a mobile game, was Multiverses. That did this. They launched it. I thought it was actually doing okay, but they wanted to make major changes, and so they took the whole game offline and relaunched it later, and then I believe it relaunched as a total flop. So, and it was just no good reason to just take it off, because I didn't think it was supposed to be a terrible game. But they have their reasons. Maybe it's the correct one. It stood out to me as odd. But good luck to them. Any thoughts on any of those games, Aaron?
Yeah, the Coin Master one is interesting. I've just been writing about that for the New Games Roundup, which will probably be out by the time people see this. So yeah, as you say, it's I guess exclusive to the Philippines for now, so we can't jump in and see what it's like. But it's amusing, as you say, that it seems to be kind of copying what Scopely did after, a little bit of the other way around. Like, it's going to be interesting to see where that goes and whether the IP has legs beyond, the original game. So as you said, obviously they haven't tested it in other genres or, any other spin-offs or anything before. So I guess, it'll be curious to see whether that becomes another like big game that we end up talking about all the time, or whether it doesn't really do anything, and it's just like Coin Masters, the one-off.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like unusual for these things to appear. They say, "Oh, that's interesting," and then they just disappear similarly, without any fanfare, just as they were launched without any. So, curious if it launched also, that would like, how would that impact the original? That is basically their biggest money maker. That's always a potential danger, especially if it's not. They'll have this covered, but especially if it's not like monetized in the same way. You don't want to cannibalize and then lose revenue. So very interesting. Right, so that brings us to the end of the PocketGamer.biz week in mobile games. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in as always. Thanks, Aaron. Have a great weekend. We'll see you all again next week. Have a good one. Goodbye.